So today we're going to talk about hurricanes and their effect on your purchase or sale of a home. Make sense?
Sure does.
All right. So we're like right now, this is as we record this, we're in the peak middle of hurricane season.
We are, and we can tell through history that it could get a little crazy.
Yeah. So hurricane season actually goes from June through December 1st. Did you know that?
I actually did not.
June 1st through December 1st. So it's for 6 months out of the year. So that's in Florida. That's a long time, right?
Yeah, but when does it peak? Like when is it, I guess, the most hurricaney?
Well, it's the most hurricaney. I guess like me, it peaks when you're 22.
Yeah.
And then I think it's the most hurricaney right now. So mid-August through mid-October. So those 2 months have the most hurricane activity. Even though in the last couple of years, we've had storms come through in November. I think we even had one in December at one point, but I do know last year, I think we had one in November. They kind of all run together after a while.
Yeah.
As growing up a surfer, I used to love hurricanes, right? You're like, oh, the waves are going to be awesome. But now as an actual adult, I mean, I've been told I'm an adult, but as an actual adult, you're like, I don't want the hurricanes. They're such a pain in the butt.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about how hurricanes affect the process of getting a loan, throughout your process of buying a home. What effect does do hurricanes or tropical storms in general have on the purchase or sale of your home?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is a great topic. Like you said, Joe, it's a very timely topic because like you said, we are right in the middle of this hurricane season. And I mean, it really could go either way. I mean, last year, I think it was Fort Myers Beach. That just got leveled,
hammered,
just absolutely devastated. So, it could be something like that, or it could maybe be a year where it's not that bad.
Right.
And so I think having that preparation is huge. Let's say there is an impending hurricane. What impact does that have on lending and just in general real estate transactions? Like, what does that actually look like practically?
Well, once that hurricane gets in the cone of uncertainty, when it's projected,
like 500 miles.
Yeah, it's a big cone because we don't know where it's going to go. But once there's a hurricane out there, whether it be in the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf, once it's out there and it starts heading this way, a lot of things happen. Okay. So if you're under contract to purchase a home, and that's really what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. If you're under contract to purchase a home, there's 4 major things that happen. Okay. So you're under contract, and this is just from the lending perspective. But the first thing is, you have to think about insurance. Okay. So insurance companies will stop binding when a named storm is headed towards us with a certain amount of science. They're going to say, well, it's headed that way. We're going to cut off binding insurance policies for, so if you want to bind, let's say you had to close next week, you haven't bound your insurance. Well, that's going to be a problem. They're not going to let you bind your insurance. They're going to shut it off until they know what happens with that storm. It comes through.
Yeah.
And so with the lender, we can't close a loan that doesn't have insurance. And there's a lot of uncertainty. That's the next thing. So let's say a hurricane went through. So number one is insurance. It's going to be hard to get insurance. Number two is, let's say the hurricane went through the area. So you've been contracted for a couple weeks. Your closing's in 2 weeks, let's say, and a hurricane comes through, and you haven't closed yet, but you've already done an appraisal. Well, a lot of lenders, they're going to want either a second appraisal to make sure there's no fundamental problems with the property, or they're going to want a reinspection typically at the very least.
Now, with that secondary appraisal, are you saying that that's even if it's not even that bad? Like, let's say there's a hurricane coming in and it kind of, even misses that area, but it was still in the vicinity. Do you still have to get a reappraisal?
Well, it depends on the lender and the investor and where it's going. But if it's been claimed a natural disaster zone,
okay.
Like we had in Brevard County, I think we had that last year. I think there were sectors that made it difficult on appraisals. But typically, if there's a hurricane that comes through, even if it grazes, if it's been declared any kind of natural disaster area and up to the lender, typically we're going to need either a reinspection. We require reinspections. If it's a VA loan, the VA is going to require that their person goes out to reinspect it. Typically, if it's not a VA conventional loan, the last couple of years, we've been doing our own reinspections for the most part. And, other lenders might have to outsource to do that or have the actual appraiser go out, but we're certified to do our own re-inspections in most cases, which saves a lot of time on getting the loan closed, which is the next thing. So the second thing is, if you've already done an appraisal and a hurricane comes through or a tropical storm, there's a very good high likelihood of either needing another appraisal or a re-inspection to verify that there's not damage and the property's still in good working order. So then the third thing really is that if there is damage, if that hurricane caused damage, you're going to need to repair that damage prior to closing, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So, obviously, and that would typically fall between the seller and the buyer. There might be some kind of negotiation there, but that buyer is expecting that home to be in the same condition when they originally contracted it. And, even if there is damage, and the new appraisal shows, hey, there's damage on the property, to get to the value that originally was, most of that damage is going to have to be fixed. Now, not necessarily all of it. It depends on what the damage is. Some of it might not need to be repaired. But we had one instance where a roof got destroyed. Well, we obviously couldn't close on that property where the roof was destroyed and they needed a new roof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of just going back to the, with us being a truly local lender, I think this kind of plays into that as well. When you had mentioned being able to actually send somebody from our company out to go and do that re-inspection or whatever that is, what's the benefit of that compared to maybe like a big box bank who doesn't have that option?
Well, I remember one hurricane that our power was down at the building. We were all able to work from home. We set up a little, I call it what was that called? God, I can't even think now. We set up a little office, outside of office at one of our houses, and we actually had all of our staff go out and check on these houses right after the storm was done to get those re-inspections done quickly, so we would be able to close. Now, the next thing I'm going to say is that if a hurricane's coming through, you should start thinking about contract extensions. While lenders are going to try to get those properties closed as quickly as possible, it halts the transaction because if there's a hurricane coming through, we got to do all this other stuff. There might need to be new disclosures sent out. Then timeframes are at play. It's very possible, and we don't like to not close on time, but it's very possible you're going to need contract extensions, which might also lead to lock extensions. Just because a hurricane came through, it doesn't mean you can close the next day, right?
Yeah.
And if the hurricane came through and did extensive damage, most lenders are going to want to make sure a little more thoroughly that everything has been fixed and that property's up to snuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and for me, going for that, contract extension, lock extension, it's like the old saying, you want to underpromise and overdeliver. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you guarantee somebody, hey, I'm going to be able to close in 2 days after this hurricane. Right. And then Lord forbid something happens and then you're just, you're done. Just
to recap a couple things. Obviously, the first thing is that a second appraisal or reinspection might be needed if one hasn't been done or one has been done and the hurricane comes through. We talked about insurance. That's the big killer. They'll stop binding, when well in advance, maybe a week before. If they see it coming and it looks like it's an imminent threat, they'll stop binding insurance. And a lot of people wait, unfortunately, till the last minute to get their insurance. Yeah. And so that becomes a problem. This might lead to delayed closings, which contracts need to be extended and rate locks need to be extended. All in all, what we typically pray that there's not a lot of damage during hurricanes, but we have a game plan. Most lenders should have a game plan ready to go. Ours is, we have step-by-step ready to go. If there's a hurricane, this is what we do. And we call all of our borrowers, let them know, hey, this is what's going on. There's a lot of them say, well, let's move up that closing date. And as a lender, moving up closing dates is already hard enough, but when you have a hurricane coming in, lenders aren't going to be real quick to want to close on that property until after that hurricane comes through. But if, the proper insurance is there, and most lenders will keep their original closing dates, though.
Now, with that insurance binding, would you say that in a situation where it's just in the middle of hurricane season, you would even use that maybe as a talking point with clients to say, hey, look, let's get this bound right away, because you just never know what could happen?
Jake, that's a great point. The hurricanes are one catalyst that might, make people say, oh, I need to get that insurance bound. But insurance prices aren't going down. Yeah. and the longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to be.
Price is going down.
No prices, it doesn't seem like it. So if there's insurance, you got to get your insurance as soon as possible. Otherwise, the longer you wait, pricing could go up. pricing on, like I said, pricing on insurance is not going down. And so, yeah, that they need to get that bound. And that would certainly help them in the middle of hurricane season. That's definitely something they should do to help move their transaction along in general.
Yeah. So, Joe, obviously you went over a lot of really great information here. Kind of in closing, what would you say for advice that you might give for maybe an individual or someone who is looking to buy a home, maybe right now in the middle of hurricane season? What would you say to them?
First things first, if you need a home, you need a home. Buy your home, okay? If a hurricane is coming this way, you're already under contract, just know that if there's a named storm that comes through the area, there's a whole lot of things that have to happen in order to get you closed. So have patience. Work with the sellers, work with your agents. Like I said, we got to make sure your insurance is bound ahead of time. Get that insurance policy as soon as you can to bind it, so you're not worried about getting coverage. Also just know that these other things might come up: contract extensions, rate lock extensions, if a named storm comes through. And work with a good team who has a good experience working with these things.
That's true. Yeah.
Work with lenders that understand the area that you're in, regardless of where you are in the country, and then understand these things that pop up. Obviously, if you're in Iowa, they don't have to know about hurricanes. But maybe there's something different.
You got to know about tornadoes.
Tornadoes, that's right. Right. So, but all in all, yeah, if you got to buy a house, you got to buy a house, and just work with a team that can coax you, get you through these issues and these little pesky hurricanes.
Yeah, that's great. And at the end of the day, my takeaway from that, like what you were saying, is it's not the end of the world if a hurricane's coming. It's not the end of a transaction. It doesn't have to be. There are steps that need to be taken and some precautions. But at the end of the day, it sounds to me from what you're saying, you can still close when there's hurricanes.
You can still close when there's a hurricane itself does not stop you from closing. Now, a hurricane that does a bunch of damage, we pray that no one gets injured, that the damage is covered by insurance.
Yes, of course.
And then there's fixes for it, because we don't want that upon anyone. But at the end of the day, if you're buying a home and haven't closed yet, and there's all kinds of damage, there might not be a closing.
What's the old saying? You can't close on a house that ain't there.
Well, I don't know if that's an old saying. I've never heard that, but it sounds legit.
Because I just made it up.
Now it's older. So, all right, Jake. So I appreciate you stopping by today and helping us out on this one.
Of course.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having you. You were thankful for having us.
I am very thankful, and I hope that everyone is thankful as well.
Okay. Thanks for watching today. I hope you learned a little something about dealing with that transaction when there's a hurricane coming through. Like, share, subscribe, all those things. And if there's a hurricane imminent, I wish you well. We'll talk to you next time.